Molly sighed and wearily rubbed her nose. Still no luck with finding work. I'm willing to take anything at this point. Just suggest something, and I can start tomorrow if needed, she said. The elderly man sitting across from her at the table shrugged apologetically. Molly, you know how it is. Our town is small, with the meat packing plant closed. Now there's hardly any jobs left in town. I know, sighed Molly. I worked there for 15 years, an employee from the employment office side. My wife worked there too, he suddenly confessed. Now we're barely making ends meet. It's only because of my job that we're getting by. So for now, you might have to rely on your husband's income too. It's not ideal, but you'll get through it. Maybe something will come up eventually. I'm divorced, replied Molly. It's been 12 years already. I see, the man sighed again. Well, Molly, I can't promise anything, but if a vacancy does come up, I'll give you a call first. Thank you so much, Molly said gratefully. You're welcome. As Molly left the office, Dylan looked at her hopefully. Well, we can buy a new bike, right? Or are you just saying that to calm me down? We agreed not to lie to each other, remember? Molly chuckled. I'm not lying. I'm just trying to stay positive and be optimistic. Okay, me too. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Dylan asked, Mom, what? Molly responded, maybe we should move from here to a bigger city where there are more job opportunities, she sighed. I've thought about that too, but how can we leave Grandpa Alex alone? We only visit him once a week anyway. It's hard to visit more often because of work, and he barely even remembers you, Mom, let alone me, Dylan added. Dylan, that's not true. Sometimes he remembers things, sighed her son, like how your parents died in the accident and all. That's when his dementia started, right? Molly gave her son a stern look. Don't talk about Grandpa like that. He raised me. I named you after him, in his honor. Mom, you know what I mean, she sighed. I understand. Yes, my dad was his only son. Grandma died of cancer a year before that, and then there was this accident where my parents crashed. Grandpa almost lost his mind from grief back then, or rather, he slowly started to fade away. Maybe it was only the fact that he had to raise me that kept him going. Molly looked sternly at her son. I'm not suggesting that. Actually, we were talking about if we visit him less often, he won't notice. Besides, if you don't find a job soon, we won't have the money to pay for Grandpa's nursing home, Molly said. Her son was, of course, right. She understood that herself, but didn't want to admit the obvious. And Dylan, as always, reasoned logically and objectively. All right, honey. Let's go, she replied. Just not too far away, and we need to find work and housing there first, Dylan nodded contentedly. Don't worry about that, Mom. I'll take care of it, her son said. If her son said he would do something, he would. And where did he get so smart and sensible? Certainly not from her, and definitely not from his dad. Molly met Bruce, Dylan's father, when she was only 21. He came to their town on tour with his circus. Bruce performed on a motorcycle, doing tricks that took the audience's breath away. Of course, no decent circus would stay in their town for more than a week. Now back then, there was a meat packing plant, a poultry farm, a bakery, and a brewery operating. Tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of people worked at these enterprises. Their young town was full of youth who needed to have a good time after a hard day's work, and the circus stayed there for several months. Molly got a ticket to the show at work. That's where she fell in love with Bruce, tall with long black hair braided, dressed in a tight leather suit with huge blue eyes. He somehow reminded her of Grandpa Alex in the photos of his youth. Molly was surprised when this circus motorcycle rider invited her to dance at the local club a couple of days later. Their relationship developed very quickly. Bruce was serious about it. They filed for marriage at the registry office 2 weeks later, and only after that, gaining courage, Molly introduced him to her grandpa. Grandpa didn't like her future son-in-law. Molly understood this from the way his thick black eyebrows frowned, despite his age, when Bruce left. Her suspicions were confirmed. "Maid, get married if you want," Grandpa said calmly. "You're already a grown woman. It's up to you to decide." "Just be careful with him," Molly snorted. She had already begun to notice changes in Grandpa's behavior and mood. She realized it was some illness and therefore tried not to attach importance to his words. Moreover, Dylan's grandpa had spoken well of her beloved. "What do you mean?" she clarified. "Be careful. What nonsense have you come up with again, Grandpa? Just understand it. He doesn't like staying in one place and will never be satisfied with one woman. He always needs something new, new cities, new adventures, new girls." Molly blushed. "You understand nothing," she shouted. "Bruce loves me, Grandpa, just trust," and Molly stormed out of the house, slamming the door. They didn't return to that conversation. Dylan's grandpa said nothing about the fiancé and later, her husband anymore. But soon after the wedding, Molly realized he was right. The circus stayed in their town for several months. All the time, the young wife lived with her motorcyclist in a small trailer. Of course, it's paradise when you're in love. But by the time the circus had to move on tour, Molly realized she was pregnant. She told her husband about it. "Well, it's up to you to decide," he replied. "Of course, you can come with me. But traveling with a belly from town to town, sleeping wherever we can, and giving birth in this trailer, not the best prospect. Also, how will you raise the baby in such conditions? And I'm not earning that much money. Yet, you can stay here, live with your grandpa, work, raise our child. I'll send money, visit the child and you when I can. Or you can terminate the pregnancy." Molly didn't want to have an abortion, nor did she want to give birth in the field, so she stayed in her hometown and returned to her grandfather. He accepted her without a word of reproach, not even once. Initially, Bruce did indeed write and call often, sending money too, albeit not much, but Molly never blamed him for it. Then, the calls and messages became less frequent, and the money came even less often. And when Dylan turned 1, his father had yet to visit him. He claimed he was too busy, couldn't interrupt the tour. His number was practically the highlight of the show. Then, a girl who worked as an assistant to the magician in the same circus called Molly. She told her everything. Bruce had been cheating on Molly for a long time. Even when he gets drunk, he publicly declares that his marriage was a mistake, and he doesn't need either his son or wife. After hearing this, Molly wrote to her husband, suggesting a divorce. He agreed without asking for the reason. Since then, they hardly communicated. In his 13 years of life, Dylan had seen his father only a few times. Sometimes he sent money or gifts. For example, that very bicycle. Apparently, Bruce's paternal instinct worked randomly. Sometimes he wouldn't write or call for a year and a half, then he would send money and gifts for 3 months in a row, only to disappear again for an indefinite period. Molly had already gotten used to this, and she never counted on support from her ex-husband. Of course, Molly could have remarried. She was beautiful and intelligent. But somehow, there was no one who suited her. Besides, there was no time for dating. She had to take care of her grandfather, raise her son, and go to work. Especially since one by one, all their enterprises began to close. Their meat packing plant held out until the end, but it closed too. "Mom, I found something." Dylan burst into his mother's room with this statement. She struggled to rub her eyes and sat up in bed. "Dylan, why are you waking me up so early?" Her son looked at her reproachfully. "Actually, Mom, it's already 11. Molly looked at the clock in surprise. She thought she had gotten used to waking up at 6 o'clock all her life, and this habit would stay with her forever. But here she was, just a week without a job, and her routine was already disrupted. "Okay, Dylan, tell me what you found." Her son sat down next to her excitedly, showing something on his phone and chattering. "Here in this town, there's an elite cottage settlement. They need a maid with accommodation, and the pay is good. Molly shook her head. She couldn't seem to wake up properly. Wait, Dylan. What maid? Her son looked at her, incredulous. Mom, just a regular maid. Who makes the bed, dusts, and what does that have to do with me? I've never worked as a maid. I thought you'd be looking for something in my field. I looked. Firstly, there are few vacancies. Secondly, it's all far from us. Thirdly, the salaries there are such that if we rent an apartment and pay for Grandpa, you and I will only live on bread and water, Molly sighed. So, you decided to give me a maid job? Yeah, her son nodded happily. The salary there is several times more than what you get at your factory. And you don't have to spend on housing. And it's not far from Grandpa's, we can visit him every 2 weeks for sure. And school, it's summer now. We'll figure something out later. Maybe I'll switch to homeschooling or get into a boarding school. I'm smart, aren't I? Molly couldn't help but smile involuntarily. I don't doubt that. And besides, Mom, Dylan added, why are you already considering something so far ahead? Maybe you'll work there in the summer, get tired of it, and quit. Molly chuckled. I agree. I'll work and look for something in my field. Agreed. The idea of going somewhere unknown was frightening, especially to take up a job where you don't understand anything. They didn't have any other option, though. They packed their things with their son and got the tickets. Before leaving, they stopped by Alex's place. He, as usual, was sitting in his chair, staring in out the window as if waiting for someone. Molly even knew who. Dylan quickly said goodbye to his great-grandfather and left, while she stayed a bit longer. We have to leave, Grandpa, Dylan, she said softly, stroking the old man's cheek. But I promise you, we'll come to visit you. Molly, the old man, suddenly replied, looking at his granddaughter. Molly and Marcus. She swallowed. What is he thinking about now? Is his whole life just a constant replay of the worst moments of their family's life? Marcus and Molly, the old man stubbornly repeated. My beloved grandchildren. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm Molly, she said with a trembling voice. I'm here, Grandpa. As they were already on the train, Dylan asked, Are you so sad because Grandpa remembered something bad again? Molly nodded. You can't hide anything from him. Yes, he kept repeating, Marcus and Molly. Marcus, is that your deceased brother? Yes, he was born 5 years before me. Everything seemed fine, the boy was perfectly healthy. They named him Marcus after Grandpa Alex's wife. But the next morning, the nurses found the baby dead. Grandpa said that the parents were grieving so much, it took several years before they decided to have another child. Is Grandpa only remembering bad things now? Her son echoed her own thoughts. I hope not, Molly sighed. They were immediately sent to the employer's house for an interview. There, they were greeted by an energetic 40-something woman. I'm the manager, she introduced herself. The house is new, we're just hiring staff, so everything is in a rush. Molly liked Emily, a simple, smart woman who does her job well and understands people. She said there was nothing wrong with Molly never working as a maid before. The work here isn't complicated. There's no need to launch ships into space, we'll teach you. We just need someone responsible, honest, and not too talkative, that's all. About me, Molly said. Excellent. Just one more question, Molly added cautiously. I have a son. Emily glanced at Dylan, who immediately joined the conversation. I can work as a gardener's assistant or a courier, but within the limits of the law. After all, I'm still a minor. The manager laughed. Sharp kid, good. We'll assign you a big staff room with 2 beds. Molly couldn't believe it was all working out for them. Only when she signed the contract and they were taken to their assigned room did she sit on the bed and say in surprise, Wow, that's something. What's up, Mom? Dylan asked calmly. He had already opened his suitcase and was rearranging his things in the closet. "It's hard to believe how quickly everything is happening," Molly replied. "Just yesterday, I was working in the factory, and today, I'm a maid in a wealthy house." "Yeah, Mom, life, it's very unpredictable," her son said with a serious face. Molly looked at him and burst out laughing. Of course, Dylan was only 13 and couldn't officially be employed. But unofficially, he was given various small tasks for which the manager personally paid him. The work was easy: sending packages, helping the cook buy groceries for the week, assisting the elderly gardener in tidying up the garden. Molly could see that her son wasn't particularly tired from these tasks and took them on with pleasure, so she didn't object. She herself was getting used to the intricacies of her new profession. In the first few days, it turned out not to be so difficult. It was just a matter of remembering where everything was stored, what to take from where, and what to clean with what. And most importantly, Emily instructed her, try not to cross paths with the owner. He's a creative, nervous person. Anything that can disrupt his inspiration irritates him. After some thought, the manager added, actually, when he's in a bad mood, everything irritates him. But we're used to it, and you'll get used to it too. And for every bad day he has, we get a monetary bonus. Is it really that bad? Is he going to throw dishes at me or push me down the stairs? Molly asked sarcastically. Emily smiled. No, nothing like that. But morally, it's worse. However, you'll see for yourself. I think in 15 years of working at the meat packing plant, there weren't any words I hadn't heard. Molly replied, don't rush to conclusions. The owner earns his living by directing and producing various music videos, commercials, and so on. They say he can curse the entire shooting day and never repeat himself. However, Molly was lucky in this regard. In the first week, the famous director and producer, Vincent, was busy shooting some complex music video and hardly ever appeared at home. But their first meeting completely compensated for the week of silence. Molly, as usual, was cleaning the living room at the time. There was no one there, although the huge TV was on. This didn't surprise her. In such a large house, something or other was always being turned on. She began to dust, inadvertently paying attention to what was happening on the screen. A bunch of girls in short dresses with one shoulder were dancing there. Several muscular men with some kind of wreaths on their heads were dancing with them. It wasn't hard to figure out who the main one was. For some reason, the girl seemed to be just floating in the air. The song, judging by the lyrics, was about love. What nonsense, what tastelessness, Molly muttered to herself. Well, as they say, nothing new. Suddenly, mocking laughter sounded behind her. Molly looked around in fear and saw a tall man dressed in a shiny black suit. He appeared to be slightly older than her, although he was doing his best to pass for younger. His thick black hair was clearly styled with gel, and his blue eyes looked at her with a smirk. Molly suddenly thought he reminded her of her grandfather in his youth, and then she scolded herself for that thought. She had thought the same about Bruce back in the day. It's nice when your own mate criticizes your own creativity, the homeowner said. People usually hire professional critics to get an objective opinion of their product, and I'm lucky. I get 2 in 1, someone to mop the floors and someone to critique my videos. And the best part is, I don't even have to pay extra for it. Molly felt her face slowly flush with a thick, torturous blush of shame. I'm sorry, Vincent. She realized with horror that she didn't know how to address him properly. She hadn't asked anyone in a whole week. This is too much, the offended director sighed. We don't even know who we're working for anymore. He suddenly wearily sat down on the couch in front of the TV, took off his glasses, and rubbed his nose. Vincent Hill, my creative pseudonym, he told Molly, who didn't know where to hide from embarrassment. Are you Baker? Molly clarified. And you're Sharp, the director sarcastically remarked. I'm just Molly Baker too, she said quietly. I haven't met any others yet. I haven't met any others either. But I'm Marcus. Pleased to meet you. I'm not so sure about that, actually. This isn't a dumb song. It's based on an ancient Greek legend. Molly frowned. She loved the legends and myths of ancient Greece at school, but she definitely hadn't read anything like that in a music video. Marcus explained the story of Zeus and Hera's relationship. It's very tragic. The chief god constantly cheats on his wife, and she suffers from jealousy all the time, concluded Molly. And he punishes his mistresses, Marcus added, among other things. So, after one of her tantrums, Zeus decides to punish his wife and change her between heaven and earth, and Hera continues to suffer both physically and from love for her husband, Marcus continued. I understand, said Molly. I've finished cleaning this room. So, if you have no further questions, may I go? Go ahead, the homeowner replied. You work well. I also work well, so I suggest we each mind our own business and refrain from commenting on topics we don't understand. Understood? Understood, Marcus, Molly said, fearing she might get fired for her outburst. However, it seemed the homeowner didn't even inform anyone about what happened. She only told her son. He, unlike his mother, wasn't particularly frightened. Mom, Dylan said, if he's a reasonable person, he won't make a big deal out of it. Molly sighed, I'm not sure about that. He's quite temperamental. He seemed normal to me, her son retorted. When did you get to know him? Molly asked in surprise. We bumped into each other in the garden once, chatted a bit. Everything was fine. Perhaps his mood swings dictate his behavior, Molly concluded. After that, every time she encountered Marcus, she tried to minimize their interaction. A few weeks later, she realized that the homeowner was actually very susceptible to mood swings. Sometimes he simply didn't notice her. Molly greeted him cautiously, but the famous director, whistling casually, went about his business. How are you today, my esteemed Molly Baker? He would ask. Have you watched many of my clips? I'm eagerly awaiting your strict but fair assessment. On such days, Molly clenched her self-control to refrain from telling Marcus what she really thought of him and his work. She politely smiled and said nothing in return. Her son met the homeowner much more often than she did, and in Dylan's eyes, Marcus Baker was more of a positive character. He's just a very unhappy person, Mom, his son defended him. Just very lonely and traumatized. Molly was setting the table for dinner. Today, she had done a thorough cleaning and was very tired. Vincent had almost driven her mad with his sarcasm, and now Dylan was defending him. Unhappy, Dylan? Do you know how much he pays me? The hardship bonus this month was half of my salary, and I'm just one of the many in his staff. Can you imagine how much money he has? Her son looked at her seriously. Money doesn't buy happiness, Mom. Molly smiled. Of course, I used to think that too. He was raised by a mother who died when Marcus Baker just entered college. Besides her, he had no other relatives. He didn't know his father. He has no wife or children, only friends who are just acquaintances with whom he communicates as long as it's convenient for both parties. Oh, what a pity, Molly pretended to sigh. But here's the thing, he inherited his wealth from his mother. With so much money, he can afford to behave like a pig. And even if no one wants to work with him, he won't go bankrupt. He's very talented, her son persisted. He doesn't just make those music videos that air on the music channels, and he's very lonely. Okay, I get it. Our poor, unhappy, rich homeowner. Nobody loves him. She tiredly rubbed her nose and said, All right, Dylan, let's go to bed. I have a day off tomorrow. We'll visit Grandpa. We don't need to wake up early. Her son was right. Grandpa didn't notice their absence. The caretaker said his condition hadn't changed. And even when Molly and Dylan visited him, he didn't show much joy. All right, Molly said as they drove back. I still feel better that we visited him. Of course, Mom, we'll keep visiting him. Her son took her hand and hugged her. Molly sighed and kissed him on the forehead. The weekend passed quickly, but Molly didn't manage to rest. There was a lot to do at home, laundry, cleaning, and so on. However, she and Dylan managed to finish it all in a couple of hours. They bought groceries and quickly tidied up the room. "I'll go to the garden to read," Molly said. "I've forgotten when was the last time I held a book in my hands." Her son nodded and suddenly pulled out a laptop. "I need to work," he replied seriously. "Where did you get the laptop?" Molly asked. "Dad gave it to me." Mom looked at him incredulously. "He didn't tell me anything about it." "Do you see him often?" "Father is afraid of you." "We don't talk much either, but more than you do with him, for sure." "All right," Molly said, "and what do you do for work?" "It's a secret, Mom." Molly couldn't resist and tousled his hair, then took a book and went to the garden. She enjoyed walking along the winding paths to the depths of the garden. In the very center stood a huge snow-white gazebo. In Molly's opinion, it looked more like a stage, beautiful, spacious, but only for a large company. It would be uncomfortable for her alone there, but she didn't intend to go there. Her son, who already knew the garden like the back of his hand, showed her a cozy little spot between two trees growing close together, with a hammock. It couldn't be seen from the pathway, but from the hammock, one could see and hear what was happening in the gazebo. That's where Molly went. It was so nice to settle comfortably in the hammock, read a book she secretly borrowed from the master's library. Anyway, Vincent hardly reads. About half an hour after Molly settled into her secret hideaway, voices were heard nearby. She saw that a noisy company had gathered in the big gazebo, led by the homeowner, of course. Molly muttered angrily, "Even on my day off, you can't help but ruin my mood, Marcus Baker." Suddenly, Marcus Baker looked up and glanced in Molly's direction. She flinched. He wasn't supposed to see or hear her from there, so it was just a coincidence. Meanwhile, the director stepped into the center of the gazebo and addressed his guests. "My dear friends, I am very grateful to you for agreeing to make this gift for me. In case someone isn't aware, we'll be staging a play, the proceeds of which will go to orphan children. Everyone gathered here today is automatically invited to my birthday. I'll repeat it once again, no useless expensive gifts. I have a lot of money, I'll buy everything for myself. But your participation, which will draw attention to our play and help raise more money, and most importantly, draw attention to this problem, is what I'll always be grateful for." Molly became interested. It seems Dylan told her that Vincent was involved in charity, but she missed it before, and now she had the opportunity to watch the rehearsal of the future charity play almost from the front rows. Over the next 2 hours, Molly didn't even open her book. She watched the rehearsal without interruption. And for the first time, thought that Marcus was indeed a talented person. The play he directed was completely different from all his previous works that Molly had seen. This was a staging based on a new script. Molly had been to the theater only a couple of times, but even she found everything understandable and interesting, and all thanks to Marcus. He didn't shout or boast about his money and titles. Here, on the contrary, he was extremely calm and collected. "Let's imagine that the audience is here." The director pointed to where the thick foliage hid Molly from his sight. "Then there will be the stage here," someone from the guests logically noted. Molly thought Vincent would interrupt the impudent man, but he just smiled and nodded. "Correct," he continued, "and so, thanks to the detailed and clear instructions of the director, both Molly and all the guests understood what the play was about, and watching them read the lines, they saw for the first time, Molly thought, that they were really good actors." She didn't even notice how much time had passed. She snapped out of it when her phone beeped, a message from her son. "Mom, did you fall asleep there?" Molly smiled and replied, "No, everything's fine. I think I'll be home in half an hour to an hour." The guests were already dispersing. The rehearsal was coming to an end. Molly buried herself in her book. Interesting, suddenly came a familiar voice nearby. Molly almost fell out of the hammock from surprise. "What are you talking about?" she decided to clarify. "I don't even know. Probably about everything, and about the book you stole from my library, and about the rehearsal you've been watching for 2 hours. Molly felt herself blushing again. "How did you know?" she asked. Marcus laughed. "It's still my house. I've explored every nook and cranny here, including this place." "Oh," was all Molly could manage. "I'm sorry, ID. Didn't mean to. I just came here to read, got it? The homeowner suddenly lost interest in the conversation. Without saying another word, he turned and left. Marcus didn't even mention this conversation to her later. He acted as if nothing had happened. From this, Molly concluded that the situation didn't bother him much. Of course, she returned the book to its place after reading, and she also tried to attend the rehearsals, which now took place in the garden 2 or 3 times a week. Marcus probably knew about it, but he didn't pay any attention to her. Overall, he seemed to have become a bit calmer. Molly knew that she and Dylan had almost become friends. It would be great if I had such an uncle on her son's side. Cheerful and rich, yes, Molly replied. That's exactly what we lack, normal relatives. She didn't discuss it with her son, but somewhere deep inside, she understood that her attitude towards the homeowner was gradually changing. Of course, he had many flaws, but at the very least, one couldn't deny that he was a talented director. And why does he make those silly music videos? Molly asked her son at one point. I can see from this play that he's capable. Why waste his talent on such nonsense? Mom, why are you acting like a child? It's business. Even famous directors do this. They shoot something for the studio that brings in easy money, and that gives them the right to do what they like, to make some good but not commercially viable films. Molly said thoughtfully. I hadn't even thought about that. When did she have time to think about it? Anyway, she had her own worries. She had to visit her grandfather, raise her son, save money, and also look for a new job. Molly didn't forget about that either, but there were really no suitable vacancies. She had to go somewhere far away for a small salary. By all parameters, this place was the most suitable. I like it here, Dylan said at one point. I'd stay here, honestly. But if you find a job where you'll be happy and have to go somewhere, I'll go with you. Thank you, son, Molly replied. But for now, this is our best option. Another day came when Marcus was in a good mood. Molly was cleaning the large living room again when the boss came in, looking pleased. Good morning, fellow, he greeted. What a wonderful morning, isn't it? Molly looked at him in surprise. Good morning, she replied. Yes, the weather is nice. And it's my birthday tomorrow, Marcus added. Happy early birthday, Molly replied. No, Molly Baker. Why congratulate in advance? The director suddenly said. You'll congratulate during the celebration tomorrow. Molly looked at him in surprise. You'll celebrate here, she clarified. The homeowner laughed. No, if I invite everyone, I want to my anniversary. I'm afraid my humble little house won't hold them all. Humble little house? Molly asked. Yes, the celebration will be at a restaurant. The date, time, and place are all specified in the invitation I gave to your son, so I expect both of you to be there tomorrow. Don't worry about transportation. I'll send a car. But Molly didn't understand what was happening. I work tomorrow, Marcus, she said firmly. How great it is that I'm your employer. You have a paid day off tomorrow, he announced. What is he up to? Molly thought. I'm sorry, Marcus, she said firmly, but we're not that close, so I can't accept your invitation. I'm just your housekeeper. Correction, for now, you're my housekeeper, he emphasized. Do you mean you'll fire me if I don't come to your birthday party? You didn't fire me for speaking badly about your work, for taking your collectible book, for eavesdropping on you and your guests in the gazebo, and now you'll fire me for this? Why do you need this? Consider it a whim of an abnormal rich man. You think of me that way, don't you, Molly? After these words, he turned and walked towards the exit, taking the door handle without turning back. He added, and don't blame yourself, Molly Baker. I saw the book in the library, on the shelf. He left, gently closing the door behind him, while Molly, with doubled anger, began to dust. What is he planning? Clearly, he didn't just invite me for nothing. On the one hand, okay, she's on good terms with his son Vincent, but he clearly doesn't like her. So he's planning something. He wants to embarrass her in front of all the guests, to knock her off her high horse. Surely, all this will take place in some expensive restaurant, and she doesn't even have a suitable dress. Maybe she should just forget it and not go. Her hand froze with the cloth in it. She can't not go. This oddball will fire her right away. And where would she go then? Everything was just starting to work out. She had paid for her grandfather 3 months in advance and even started saving. She had to hold on here as long as possible, and then when she was leaving, she would tell this director everything she thought of him. Dylan immediately noticed that his mother was not in the mood. "Are you worried about tomorrow's birthday celebration?" he asked. 40 years is not a milestone, Molly mechanically replied, and then stopped herself. "How did you understand it? It's all elementary. We've never been to such events with you, but I've thought everything through. Sit on the chair and close your eyes." "So, Dylan, what have you come up with this time?" "Mom, do you trust me?" "All right, as you say." Molly obediently sat on the chair and closed her eyes. There was some rustling and the sound of a zipper being undone, followed by the rustle of fabric. "Open up." Her son held in his hands a neat men's suit with a crisp white shirt, a bow tie, and a classic black dress. "I decided that we'll go in this," he said joyfully. "Where did you get this?" Molly gasped. "They're terribly expensive." "Don't worry, Mom, it's rented for a day." "And where did the money come from?" "Well, I'm getting paid for working here." Her son pretended to be offended, "and Dad also sends money." "He's become overly generous lately," Molly remarked. "Emily will do your makeup and hair." "I arranged it," Dylan continued, "and Uncle Marcus's driver will take us there." "Uncle Marcus's? Is that how you call him?" Her son pretended not to notice and said, "Cool, right? I thought of everything." "Great, but we don't have a gift." "I have no idea what to come up with in the remaining time, even though I have tomorrow off. I still don't know where to go and what to see. He has everything." "I thought of that too," Dylan said and reached under the bed. "A guitar." Molly gasped. "Did you borrow that too?" "Yeah, you'll sing something and play." "Dylan, I can't even remember the last time I sang." "Well, you have today and tomorrow to rehearse." When they arrived at the restaurant, Molly felt sick. Of course, she expected the celebration to take place in some luxurious place, but she didn't imagine it would be so expensive. She felt like a Hollywood star who was about to step onto the red carpet under the lenses of dozens of journalists. She felt scared. "Mom," she turned to Dylan. "What, dear? You look absolutely stunning." Molly smiled. Suddenly, all the anxiety and tension about tonight's event disappeared. The dress her son had chosen fit perfectly, although it was a classic straight cut. Molly looked as if she could immediately go to a reception with the king himself. Emily did her hair in a light, beautiful style and applied just a little powder and eyeshadow. "You already have gorgeous skin," the manager said. "I'm just enhancing your beauty a little. Can you bring us the guitar later?" Dylan, meanwhile, arranged with the driver. "I'll call you." Finally, the car stopped, and they got out. Molly straightened her shoulders. So what if she was just a simple housekeeper and she ended up here by the will of a stubborn boss? That didn't make her any worse than others. After all, today she had a paid day off. They were both dressed gorgeously. They came to an expensive restaurant where food and drinks were paid for. Why not enjoy it? The evening was sure to be unforgettable, and it was most of all, Molly was surprised that her son felt so comfortable here. He easily chatted with completely unfamiliar people, of whom there were an unimaginable number. As for Molly herself, she simply sampled appetizers and drank champagne. Then the solemn part began. Various people took the stage to congratulate Marcus Baker on his birthday, and each one said something good about him. Molly listened to it all with growing amazement. It turns out Marcus helped a lot of people. Someone became famous after his music video and became a star. He saved someone's almost lost career. Somewhere he helped for free. He gave money to someone, introduced them to the right people, or gave recommendations. Finally, it was Molly's turn. "Mom, catch," a voice next to her son said. Molly turned her head and saw Dylan handing her a guitar. "Thank you," she replied. Molly gripped the instrument and walked to the stage. She noticed her legs trembling slightly, but she quickly told herself to pull it together. What's the fear? It's just some restaurant hall. She had traveled with the orchestra in school and performed in front of huge halls when she was just 10 years old. What was there to be afraid of at almost 36? "Good evening, everyone," Molly said into the microphone. All the guests instantly fell silent and stared at her. She noticed the birthday boy, who also fell silent and looked attentively at her. "Tonight, I've heard many good words about Marcus Baker," Molly said. "Unfortunately, I can't join in and say something similar." The room was so quiet you could hear a fly buzzing. Molly continued, "Because unlike you, I've only known him for a few weeks. I've been working as a maid for Marcus for only the second month." The guests murmured, someone laughed, someone snorted. Marcus smiled. "So, I won't bore you with the same old banal wishes, and we'll just move on to the gift," Molly concluded. She sat on the chair prepared for her, adjusted the microphone, sat down, and checked the guitar. It was perfectly tuned. Molly looked into the birthday boy's eyes. Suddenly, he reminded her remarkably of Alex's grandfather from an old photograph. "So, the song," Molly said. Yesterday and this morning, she rehearsed a particular song. Of course, the lyrics were about a birthday. It was a very well-known song and was easy to play on the guitar. But now she suddenly caught herself playing the beginning of a completely different song. It was her mom's favorite song, Molly's only memory of her parents. She vaguely remembers only the image of her mom playing this song on the guitar and singing while her dad rocked little Molly in his arms. As she grew older, she begged her grandfather to sing her this song. Molly learned it by heart and sang it many, many times. She even picked up the guitar to learn to play her mom's song. And then Molly played it many times for her son, and Molly sang. It was easy and calm for her thoughts were somewhere far away. She didn't even notice herself playing the last chord, only the thunderous applause brought her back to reality. Molly scanned the room. Most of the guests stood up, and almost everyone clapped loudly. Someone whistled, someone shouted bravo. Molly found her son's eyes, he was smiling broadly. But the birthday boy was nowhere to be seen. Molly stepped off the stage and approached Dylan. "Mom, that was just magnificent," he said. She nodded. "I'm a bit tired. We've congratulated the birthday boy. Maybe we should go home." Almost a week after that, Molly didn't meet the homeowner. Dylan and the other housemates hardly saw him either. Molly never understood if it had anything to do with her performance or if Marcus just had urgent matters. On her next day off, she went early in the morning to read in her secluded spot. After lunch, she and Dylan had a train to her grandfather's, and there was still some free time left. Molly took a new book from the homeowner's library. "I thought after that time you'd stop dragging my books around," Marcus's voice rang out. Molly smiled. "Well, you didn't fire me after the first book. I did attend your birthday, so now I'm not afraid of getting fired. Besides," she added, "you know I always put them back in place." The homeowner chuckled. "Yeah," he said thoughtfully, "the birthday was fun. I enjoyed it all." "I'm glad," Molly replied. "Of course, your performance impressed everyone," he added, "especially me. You have a beautiful voice." "Thank you," Molly said. "I wanted to ask, what song is that?" Molly sighed. "It's my mom's favorite song. I remember her singing it to me." "You said your parents died when you were 3? "Yes, and how old are you now?" "I'll be 36 this year." "So, you're 5 years younger than me?" "Seems so," Molly replied, still not understanding why he was asking. The director looked troubled. He couldn't sit still and paced back and forth. Finally, he stopped and asked, "Remember when I talked about my childhood?" Molly cautiously clarified, "You only said you had a mother who died when you turned 18. The homeowner impatiently waved his hand. "Let's use you with each other. It'll be easier for both of us." Molly was surprised, but didn't attach much importance to the homeowner's new whim. "You, it is then. What's the difference, right? I didn't know my father. My mother never talked about him. I never saw him once, no gifts or letters from him." Molly nodded, indicating she was listening attentively. She still didn't understand where this conversation was leading. "I remember one strange incident from my childhood," Marcus continued. "I was 7 or 8 at the time. That day, I was playing at the nearby playground after school. Usually, my mom or her driver would pick me up from there, but that time, they were late for some reason." He frowned, as if trying to remember all the details. Then he continued, "I remember being tired of chasing my friends and sitting on a bench. And then, a man and a woman approached me. I noticed they were very agitated, as if they meant no harm. The woman was literally shaking with excitement. "What did they want from you?" Molly asked. "I didn't quite understand it then," the homeowner continued. "The woman kept saying they finally found me, that they would take me home soon. I got scared when she hugged me and wanted to stroke me, and the woman sang me a song." "That song, what song? The one you gave me for my birthday?" "That's impossible. My mom composed it herself. My grandfather told me." "That's why I wanted to find out." Molly rubbed her nose. "Wait a second. How did that meeting end?" Marcus sighed. "My mom's car pulled up. As soon as they saw her, they ran away." "Did you tell your mom what happened?" He said, not to worry, that they were just some weirdos. "Have you ever seen them again?" Molly asked. "No, never again. I guess now I need to tell you something too. Maybe this information will complete the puzzle, although to be honest, I couldn't piece it together entirely." Molly told him about her little brother who died at birth. Marcus listened attentively and only bit his lips. "Well, Molly Baker," he said, "now as I understand it, both of us have suspicions that the coincidences of our last names are more than just a simple coincidence. But how do we find out?" Molly sighed. "Practically all the participants of those events are either dead or were infants, except one. But it's far from certain that he'll talk." As they were already on the train, Molly asked him, "What are you thinking about? You look kind of grim." "About my mom. If everything we've been thinking about in the past few hours is true, she doesn't come out in the best light in front of us." Molly, gathering courage, tightly squeezed his hand. "It's too early to talk about it. We can only guess so far, all the facts point to that. But you're right, let's not draw conclusions until we meet Grandpa Alex." Molly looked at him. "As I've said before, he's in very poor condition. There are periods of clarity, but you never know when they'll happen. The older Grandpa got, the rarer they became," Molly explained. "I understand," Marcus replied seriously, "but it's better than not trying." She feared Marcus would be horrified by the conditions Grandpa was living in. He probably had never seen such a facility in person, but the director remained quite composed. "How's Grandpa doing?" Molly asked the nurse. "As usual," she replied. "And you're here today, without your son but with a suitor?" "He's my brother," Marcus replied. "I'm sorry." Grandpa looked as usual. Molly approached closer and sat in front of him. "Grandpa Alex," she called. His pale blue eyes stared at her for a second, then looked out the window again. "I'm not alone today, Grandpa. Marcus is with me." She thought she saw a flicker on Grandpa's face. "Remember," she continued, "when I came to you recently, what did you say to me?" Grandpa didn't react. "You said, Marcus and Molly are my grandchildren," she reminded him. "Marcus is with me." "Marcus?" the old man weakly asked. The director approached closer and sat so his face was at the level of the old man's eyes. "Marcus, it's me," he said. Marcus, the old man slowly repeated. You have our eyes, Molly suddenly smiled. What is he talking about? The director didn't understand. All the men in our family have big blue eyes and black, slightly curly hair, she explained, adding, you resemble my grandfather when he was young. I've thought about it several times. Yes, the grandfather said, very much alike. Grandpa, Molly said cautiously, did you know Marcus is alive? Grandpa Alex shook his head. Your parents suspected it, he said. Can you tell us? He nodded again, stared out the window, and remained silent for probably a minute. When Molly thought he had retreated into himself again, Grandpa spoke. When Marcus was born, there was a woman with the same last name as ours in the same ward. Her child was taken to the ICU. Marcus was taken to a separate room for newborns for the night, and in the morning, she was told her baby had suddenly died. Really, Marcus said thoughtfully, did our parents suspect something right away? Grandpa Alex nodded. Yes, there were vague suspicions. The doctors didn't say anything concrete, and at the time, I thought your parents were just distraught. Then for several years, they didn't mention the baby, but apparently they were investigating something all this time. Then I was born, Molly added. Grandpa nodded. And then they told me they found out something, he continued, but they didn't exactly explain. They said it needs to be checked, and then they died, Molly guessed. Yes, and they didn't have a chance to tell anything. Their accident, Molly saw how hard it was for Marcus to say this, but he managed. Could it have been staged? No, I checked. The accident was a pure coincidence. The woman who picked you up wasn't responsible for it. The director breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the old man looked at him intently. You're Marcus? He asked. Yes, and the grandfather started crying. Summer was coming to an end. Molly still couldn't accept the fact that Dylan would leave them tomorrow. Her son got into a prestigious high school with an economics focus. So what are you really interested in? Molly asked. Although after you sold the old bike at the price of a new one, I had no doubt about your abilities. It's indeed an interesting subject, Mom, especially after spending so much time with Uncle Marcus and his friends all summer. I realize that this is my thing. I'm happy for you, kiddo, although how can I call you a kiddo anymore? You've always been more mature than me. Dylan smiled. I was really afraid to leave you alone, he confessed, and now knowing that someone will take care of you, I'm relieved. Who else cares about whom? Of course, they are still settling in after they and their brother found out the whole truth. Marcus first took his grandfather out of the nursing home and moved him into his house. Then Molly and Dylan moved from the servants' room to a separate wing. Then they got used to each other. For example, Grandpa Alex began to feel much better. No, he didn't fully recover, and he still had episodes when he didn't understand where he was and who was around him, but now he had more and more moments of clarity when he recognized his grandson and granddaughter, and he even remembered his great-grandson. Marcus hired good doctors, took Grandpa to procedures, and his condition improved. Molly also got used to being the younger sister of the household owner. What's this? She said to Marcus. Do I no longer have to work as your maid? He pretended to think. Only if you really want to. I don't want to, Molly admitted, because that would mean listening to your sarcastic remarks. You're my little sister. Listening to my sarcastic remarks is your direct duty for the rest of your days. Oh, come on. After there was no need to work as a maid for money anymore, Molly started thinking about returning to the factory. Her son now lived in the dormitory at the school. Marcus took care of Grandpa, which meant she, Molly, could do what she wanted. So, back to the factory again, her brother asked, haven't you had enough of it for 15 years? You've come a long way there actually, and I was promised a promotion, but the factory closed down. Well, said her brother, maybe you should rest for a while. Just imagine, you on vacation. You came straight to me from the factory, didn't you? Molly promised to think about it, but one day, her brother approached her and said that someone wanted to see her. She was surprised, but followed him downstairs. A completely unfamiliar man in his 50s, in a business suit, was waiting for them. "Hello," Molly said awkwardly. "This is James Wright." Marcus introduced the man in the suit. "He recently bought the brand that produced the products of your meat processing plant." "Your sausages were very tasty," said James Wright, extending his hand for a handshake. "Thank you," Molly replied, shaking his hand. "Have you tried the cutlets?" Didn't have to. When I found out your factory was closing, I wanted to buy it. Unfortunately, leaving the plant in its current location won't be possible, but we can open it elsewhere and produce the same products under the same brand and with the same taste," said James Wright. "That's great," Molly replied, not understanding what it had to do with her. "James Wright needs an experienced consultant," her brother suddenly intervened in the conversation, "who knows the product inside and out, from the inside, so to speak." Molly stared at them in confusion. "Are you talking about me?" "Of course," James Wright replied. "Marcus said his younger sister has worked at this meat processing plant for half her life and can help me." Seeing her bewildered expression, he added, "Not just like that, of course. I want to offer you a job, most likely a permanent one." Molly could only say, "I don't even know what to say." "I understand. Now, James Wright, I'll leave this folder for you. All the terms of the job are there. You have a week to think it over, then I'll expect an answer." He left a thick folder with documents on the table and left. Molly turned to her brother and squinted. "Why did you arrange all this, little brother?" He calmly smiled. "Why not? James and our old friends. He was worried that he bought the brand, but couldn't find an expert, and I knew you, so it all came together. Just a coincidence, of course." Molly agreed to Mr. Wright's offer, although she was scared. She didn't regret it. It was nice to come back to her hometown and show others. Teaching them was also interesting. Molly was grateful to her brother for such help. When Dylan first came home for the weekend, it was already deep autumn. "You're just in time," Molly said to her son and kissed him on the cheek. "We're about to have dinner." When everyone sat down at the table, Dylan looked surprised at the dishes in front of him. "Is this all from our meat processing plant?" Molly smiled. "Well, not exactly from that same one, but the taste is the same." Dylan frowned suspiciously but tried the cutlet. His face lit up with a smile. "Indeed, it's the same." "Ah, it's all thanks to my sister," Uncle Marcus said proudly. "Or you who suggested all this," Molly replied. "And don't forget about Grandpa," suddenly grumbled Alex. Everyone laughed. Marcus poured champagne into glasses and made the first toast. "All my life, I thought that life gave me a lot. I was born into a wealthy family, easily got into the institute I wanted, made a career, multiplied my fortune, and all this time, I tried to convince myself that I had everything in life, that I was happy being alone, although it was not true at all. Only now, when I found my younger sister, my grandfather, and my nephew, learned who my parents really were, I understood how happy I am." Molly smiled when she caught his gaze. "Despite the fact that you were the most obnoxious person when we first met," she said, "I'm happy you came into my life." She looked at her grandfather. He smiled back at her, then looked at his grandson and great-grandson. "I'm just happy too," he said shortly. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.